Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the 2023 LAS Collaborators Day Webinar. My name is Alyson Wilson, and I'm the Principal Investigator for LAS, and I am going to help kick things off this afternoon. So if I could have the next slide. So this afternoon, we are going to have 5 speakers. And we are each going to cover different aspects of LAS, talking a bit about the background for LAS, some about how to respond to our call for white papers, and then taking a bit of a deep dive into each of the technical areas that you may wish to collaborate with us on starting in January of 2024. In addition, we have a number of other LAS staff members who will be helping answer questions in the webinar's question and answer window. So next slide. So there are 2 key takeaways that I would like you to have. If you have any questions about what you hear today or anything that comes up as you are deciding about whether to respond to our call for white papers this year. And so the first thing is, if you have any questions at all, a good email address to reach us is lasoutreach@ncsu.edu. We will be basically continuously triaging that email address, and your question will get to the right person. In addition, please take a look at our website at ncsu-las.org. You will find the call for white papers. You'll find additional information coming out of Collaborators Day. You will find the webinar recording, the slides, and all of the information that you might need will be posted to our website. So next slide, please. So today, as we are on the webinar, what we're going to ask you to do is, if you have questions, please find the Q&A feature in Zoom, and you can put your questions into the Q&A. Some of those questions we will answer directly back to you. Some of those questions we will share at various points during the webinar and answer them for the entire audience. We do have multiple places as we go through the presentation where we will be pausing to answer those questions. So if you are watching the video later, or if you don't have the opportunity to get your question answered today, again, I would encourage you to please email lasoutreach@ncsu.edu with your questions, and we will get back to you very quickly. Next slide. So as we're looking at the agenda for today, here's what we would like to cover. So we are going to do just a brief overview of the Laboratory for Analytic Science and how we work. We will talk through our 2024 LAS areas of interest for which we are making our call for white papers. We will talk through the white paper submission process. And as I mentioned at several points during the webinar, we will pause for questions. Next slide. So just to do a brief overview, which I hope will give some context to the conversations that we will have, I wanted to just talk a bit about what is LAS. And so the Laboratory for Analytic Sciences is a mission-oriented academic industry government translational research collaboration that works at the intersection of technology and tradecraft. So let me unpack a few of those ideas because they're going to come up and they're going to be important as you start to think about how to position your white papers. So the first piece of that is that LAS is mission-oriented. What that means is that all of the projects that we work on have a direct tie back to a problem or an interest of the intelligence community. And as we go through today, we're going to talk about that in a number of ways. We're going to talk about broad research areas. We're going to give some examples of areas of application. And so again, that's really what you're going to see driving some of these areas that we have interest in. So an academic industry government collaboration. So we are excited to solicit white papers both from academic participants and industry participants. And when we get to the section of the webinar that talks about how to submit, we will have some details that talk about what the level of effort is, what you will want to include, and how to think about what that collaboration might look like. When we talk about ourselves as a translational research collaboration, What we really mean is we are trying to focus on how we take what we produce from the responses to the white papers, and we get that transitioned into the hands of the government to help them solve problems. And one of the things that we will cover as part of the webinar is what those different kinds of products might look like that you might be thinking about producing as you go through the white paper process. So next chart, please. When we talk about ourselves as really working at that intersection of technology and tradecraft, we really think about three things that we are trying to do. So the first thing is we are trying to investigate technical approaches that might have the potential to address analysis challenges. The second thing that we're trying to do is trying to develop analytic tradecraft, trying to develop methodology that helps solve problems that can leverage research and technology and actually solve a problem for the government. And the third thing is we really want to think hard about how would we transition our investigations and our solutions to our partners so that they can operationalize and hopefully ultimately scale the solutions that we develop here at LAS. Next chart, please. So if we are looking at 2023 to give you an idea about how many people collaborate and participate with us, this year we are working with 23 faculty members from 12 different universities. 5 of those are from NC State, an additional 18 faculty from other universities. As part of that, we also have 17 graduate research assistants. And if you could go back, please. Oh, sorry, I'm good. 17 graduate research assistants and 1 postdoc working with us. 18 different hourly interns who are participating as part of the projects or in summer or academic year programs. We're working with 7 different industry partners in addition to the 12 universities. We are partnered with 1 national laboratory, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. We have about 40 full-time government civilian employees who work with us and 14 full-time NC State employees. So next slide. And just briefly, this slide has logos from all of our partners for this year, just to give you a sense of the breadth of different organizations that we work with. So next slide. So what I would like to do now is I would like to hand over the next portion of the talk to Dr. Matt Schmidt, who is the LAS Director of Programs, to continue on with additional discussion. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Alyson. So as Alyson mentioned, I'm Matt Schmidt. I'm LAS's Director of Programs. And before we get into the different technical areas and application areas that LAS is interested in, I want to take a little time to talk a little bit about what exactly a project at LAS looks like and how does the collaboration work. So next slide. So projects at LAS that involve our funded collaborators typically are focused on unclassified work. But at the same time, they're working on challenges and they're working on questions that have applications to operational challenges, some of which that may be classified. And the question comes up, well, how exactly do you do that, right? So the main way that we do that is that a research project at LAS that's working with one of our funded collaborators, the team that's working on it is going to involve the funded collaborator, but it's also going to involve the LAS staff who are here. And those staff members bring a lot of expertise around the operational challenges and the operational environment about where things might transition. And that can be important context to our funded collaborators who really are bringing a lot of the expertise on the technical areas, on just what might be potentially feasible. And it's the team that really figures out, okay, here's something that may be feasible and would actually apply or would actually meet some of the operational challenges. And so we leave our guidance at this point in the cycle a little open-ended. That allows enough space for that collaborative team to find where is the very specific direction that would be the most applicable and the most impactful. So most of the projects at LAS are going to be funded for 12 months. They're going to start in January and they're going to wrap up in December. All of them are going to have the potential for follow-on work in future years, but we are requiring that projects produce some sort of tangible outcome by the end of the year. So next slide. So what are those outcomes that we're looking for from an LAS project? They can be varied. They can be research papers, they can be prototypes, they can be design concepts, but they're all really trying to explore and make progress on questions or capabilities that are operationally relevant, and do it in such a way and produce the tangible outcome so that others may take them and actually make them and integrate them into something usable for operational analysts. Next slide. So as I mentioned, that can be varied, right? If you're getting a research question that may have been motivated by a particular application, the outcome there may be a research paper. It may be fundamental research that's publishable in conferences and journals. It may be experimental data from a human subjects research project, something that actually is a very traditional research project. It's just being motivated by an application or a challenge problem of interest to LAS. It could also be something that really is more of a design concept, right? So if we're exploring new ways of approaching the problem, new ways of leveraging technology and integrating that with analytic tradecraft, maybe that's a storyboard or a documented workflow. Maybe it's something that says, this is how this could work and produce this capability that would address this application need or something like that. And ideally, those ideas turn into prototypes, turn into proof of concepts or things that we can use to validate that, yes, this is actually generating a benefit for end users, for intelligence analysts, whether that's being done through a proxy application, and we'll talk about some of those later on in the presentation, or whether that's something that we're running a research study on, but it's something that we can test. It's something that we can actually experimentally validate. Yes, this does have an impact for analysts. So next slide. So what are we looking for in our collaborators? Well, the first thing, as I mentioned, the collaborators are bringing a lot of the expertise and knowledge about the different topic areas. So we're looking for collaborators that have a proven record of researching the types of questions and the types of technical areas that we'll discuss today, and also bringing some relevant capabilities, right? So not just being able to research things, but maybe have built capabilities similar to what LAS interests are. We're also interested in collaborators that are very open to collaboration, especially with the LAS staff. As I mentioned, that's essential to making sure that the research and the development that's going on within the project has the greater potential for potentially transitioning to our sponsors and stakeholders. So that's about engaging with the staff. That's about engaging with potential users and the people who understand this is how this might apply or this is how this might transition. And then finally, we're looking for collaborators that really diversify and broaden the knowledge base that LAS has. Most of the LAS staff have their own expertise in different areas, but that's not nearly broad enough to address all of the challenges that are facing intelligence analysts. And so we're looking for not just folks in the computer science or machine learning areas that we're talking about, but also people who are looking at what does this mean from a user's perspective? What are the cognitive behaviors of an analyst, and how does that impact what capabilities are needed and things like that? So ways that we can kind of broaden that that pool of expertise are what we're looking for in the white papers. Next slide. And so wanted to pause here and see if there were any questions in the Q&A that would make sense to address live. And if not, we can go ahead and move on to the technical areas. So Alyson, is there anything that we need to address right now?
No, not yet.
Okay, so next slide. So the main part of the call for white papers and of the main part of this presentation is going to be talking about the different technical areas that LAS is interested in, right? These are the technical areas that we would like to work in with our collaborators. And so we invited a number of the staff at LAS to talk in a little bit more depth around the three main technical areas that LAS is interested in: the operationalizing AI and machine learning, the human-machine teaming, and content triage. So next slide. So we'll start with the operationalizing AI and machine learning, and I'll turn this over to Jascha Swisher, who's one of our technical program managers here at LAS.
Okay, thanks a lot, Matt. As Matt said, my name's Jascha. My portfolio covers a lot of our AI and ML work, as well as some of our projects that are more focused on human-machine teaming, which my colleague Christine will talk about here in just a second. Let's see, next slide. All right, thanks. So it's well known that machine learning is resource intensive. A lot of recent attention has been given to the resource requirements of training ML models, and particularly large language models. But at a large enough scale, your resource requirements at inference time are going to be an equal or greater concern. Current state-of-the-art models in the text or image domains are resource hogs, and no matter how well resourced your organization is, a strategy where you're running every data object you have through an H100 GPU is going to break down at some point. We're interested in ways to lower this resource cost, including continued advances in less computationally intensive ML techniques that are able to achieve performance close to the state of the art, and methods to reduce the inference time compute requirements of LLMs and other state-of-the-art models, such as quantization and graph optimization. We're also, of course, still interested in ways to reduce the cost of model training. In the environments we're most interested in, a main cost driver is going to be the time and effort of cleared staff who you would need to get to labeled training data. We have, and we continue to support projects that are aimed at using this human effort most efficiently, including work on data labeling methodology, training data selection, and augmentation with synthetic data. We're also interested in research that aims to reduce the infrastructure cost of model training, and specifically in parameter and memory efficient methods to fine-tune LLMs. Next slide. So the second area that we call out as being of interest next year is going to be applications of LLMs. Generative models are, of course, a huge ongoing news story, and we're probably nowhere close, all of us collectively as a society, to understanding their full potential yet. But new applications are still being found for the slightly older transformer models of the past few years, including BERT and its colleagues in the Sesame Street revolution. Two particular applications that we found useful at LAS, as have many others at other places, are using generative models for abstractive summarization, which my colleague Lori is going to be talking about a little later on in her section, and using embedding vectors for semantic search over text, as well as over images and video. Some particular related challenges that we're interested in include evaluation of generative model output, especially evaluations of more subjective tasks like summarization and question answering. We're interested in best practices around data governance so that we can understand what data a model was trained on and subsequently retrain it if necessary without data that's been found to be problematic. And also we're interested in questions around output traceability, specifically methods for sourcing references in retrieval augmented generative question answering. Now, at LAS, we believe that much of the value of machine learning and AI is going to come from applications where ML is tightly integrated into an analyst's workflow. An example of this sort of integration in another domain is GitHub's Copilot, which acts as a very intelligent autocomplete function. Now, nobody is asking the model to write the entire program from scratch, and there's no expectation that what the model produces will be flawless. But together, the human programmer and the AI assistant are more effective than either would be alone. Now, this topic relates very closely to our interests in human-machine teaming, which Christine will be talking about in a moment, as LAS is interested both in the ML-driven tools and affordances themselves, as well as in understanding how analysts make use of such tools. Current LAS-supported work in this area includes applications of ML to support analysts working with voice data and analysts attempting to recognize potentially manipulated media, both application areas that Matt will be talking about a little later on in his section. Another area of value that we see in analyst-facing applications of ML is in applications of highly customized models. The prototypical use case here is one where an intelligence analyst has a very specialized portfolio and would benefit from an individually customized model that, for instance, could help to flag items where it's perhaps only that one analyst who has the expertise to recognize the significance of what's being flagged. So this analyst has a mission need, and they're capable of providing some training data, but they probably only have the time to give a small amount of data, and they don't have the data science skill set to even know where to begin in developing this model themselves. LAS is interested in projects that aim to lower this activation barrier for end-user customized ML models. This potentially touches on a wide range of research areas, including ways to lower training data requirements, UI/UX work to simplify the process for an end user to train their model, and also work on data pipelines and model deployment so that our analyst model has somewhere to go besides their own desktop. This topic also overlaps with LAS's interest in generating individually tailored recommendations and summaries, as will be discussed in Matt's application area section. And so next up, I'm going to pitch to my colleague, Christine Brugh, who's going to talk about our focus area in human-machine teaming.
Great, thank you, Jascha. As Jascha said, my name is Christine Brugh. I am another one of the technical program managers here at LAS. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about section 3.2 of the call for white papers, which is the human-machine teaming area. Just to reference some of what Jascha was talking about in his presentation, this area is highly complementary to the operationalizing AI ML area. And I think what you'll find as I discuss this a little more is just a shift in the focus. So away from improving the technology to how do we consider the human and consider the user's experience in using the newly developed technology. So again, this is section 3.2 in the call for white papers. Today I'll be discussing this in a little more detail, providing answers to any questions you submit in the Q&A, and also giving some examples of current work. So the interest from LAS in this area comes from the perspective that the landscape of analysis is rapidly advancing. This involves the integration of new technologies, which form human-machine teams to perform analytic work. Improving the performance of these teams is a high priority, and this necessitates understanding the strengths of human users and the strengths of automation for performing aspects of analytic work. There are some areas where human users might be more advantageous to performing the work, and likewise there are others where automation can be more efficient and more quickly get to a good solution. So human-machine teaming envisions a world in which automated teammates can anticipate and respond to analyst needs to seamlessly execute an analytic workflow. Again, as you've heard from the questions that Jascha has posed, we are not yet there in terms of our development of technology. And so this development needs to occur alongside developing a better understanding of human analyst needs and their behavior as they interact with tools and systems to complete their mission. For example, a technology that focuses on directing a user's attention to useful data will require an understanding of the problem the user is seeking to solve, steps that have already been taken to try to solve that problem, and how new evidence might help the user strengthen their analysis. The tech can be really good and even outperform human users at detecting anomalies and unique features of data. It is ultimately a human user who must process the output of that result and then make use of it as they prepare their final report. So automated technologies must provide utility to users in the context in which they work. And this can involve understanding the user's cognitive capacity to process the output of the technology, the mission of the organization interested in the result of the analysis, and the constraints of the user's team or environment. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. By studying human-machine teaming, we want to improve how automation can help analysts. We seek to do this through interdisciplinary research, where we want to understand people's experience with the teaming technologies and how to create technologies that alleviate pain points and reduce cognitive load. As with the previous example that I gave, technology can reduce the burden associated with some analytic tasks, but for it to be effective, we need to understand how humans actually incorporate the new technology into their workflow. Within this area, we are focusing specifically on the human user's experience of the technology and how it enables them to perform better analysis. So we have two primary perspectives from which we approach this work. The first is in the first bullet point you see on the slide. In the third bullet point you see on the slide. There we go, where we are supporting user interactions with tools or systems. So within this area, we are looking at how in the process of analysis, a user is going to interact with an array of tools or systems. Our goal is not simply to build a better tool or to figure out how all the existing tools are flawed, but to provide the groundwork of necessary research and prototyping to understand what actually makes a helpful tool for a user. We want to understand users' cognitive processes for tasks and consider how we can design systems that will best support these processes, including reducing cognitive burden in search, triage, and decision-making. And for the last bullet point here, we are looking at developing models of user activities and behavior. Within this area, we want to apply general research on how people make decisions to specific problems within the analytic context. We want to examine how people's trust in automated systems plays a part when they are making decisions or deciding what actions to take. We also want to understand how and why users engage or do not engage with new technologies and how systems can be better designed to meet the needs of users or teams of users. Projects in this area, like Matt was pointing out, might not necessarily lead to independently prototyping a new technology, but rather provide the groundwork for understanding how to build better HMTs. If we know the process that a human user is taking for their analysis, then we can start to understand how a technology may support them. And could we go to the next slide? So I'm going to conclude here with 4 examples of currently funded work in this area. Providing these as context for questions and types of projects that LAS gets excited about within the area of human-machine teaming. So the first is prototyping the use of LLMs to generate intelligent suggestions and develop robust models of potential analyst workflows, actions, and intentions. So here, our focus is not just on whether the LLM can provide a good suggestion, so that is a core piece of this task for sure, but evaluating the usefulness of that intelligent suggestion as a human user works through a complicated analytic task. In what ways does the intelligent suggestion by the language model alter or improve the user's performance in the task? Can they get to the correct solution more quickly, or can they explore a greater variety of data with less burden on them to generate all potential hypotheses or next directions for their analysis? Next, we are looking at exploring methods for embedding information about model confidence into the output seen by a user with regard to a specific analytic task. Here, the question is whether we can provide language analysts with information about their automatically generated transcript by embedding information about model confidence in the transcript. This is complicated because we do not want to overburden our analyst by providing them or making them interpret complicated model output, but rather we want to flag and draw their attention to areas where the model might not be performing well. So visually, how can we do this and how does that change the analyst workflow and allow them to find answers and hopefully get to the correct solution? The next project is discovering how alignment between a user's cognitive factors and an AI assistant impacts task performance and trust in AI recommendations. Here, we are using a supply chain analysis task, and this work is seeking to explore whether recommendations from an AI assistant help users reach the correct conclusion, and whether there are differences in a user's confidence and the perceived helpfulness of the AI based on users' cognitive factors and alignment with the AI and the way that it presents information. This work both helps us broadly understand the potential usefulness and acceptability of AI assistance within an analytic workflow, but also specifically how AI can be tailored for individual needs. And finally, I want to talk about our project on prototyping methods to better support analysts in the use of data and information in their workflows by leveraging a particular model of analytic cognition. This project combines design and epistemology by exploring how to visually represent different elements of narrative and discover how visual representations might help analysts develop more robust analyses. So if you are interested in engaging further with us about human-machine teaming, we would love to chat with you during the office hour sessions. We will give you all the information about those a little bit later in this presentation. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Lori to cover our final area.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Wachter, and I'm one of the technical program managers at the Laboratory for Analytic Sciences. One of my main focuses at the LAS is our research efforts on content triage. I think you will also find that there is overlap with both the human-machine teaming and operationalizing machine learning, as Christine and Jascha have called out, but again, the slightly different motivation for triage. In the past, the LAS has generally defined the content triage challenge as how to distill large volumes of data down to precise data found to be of significant potential interest. For 2024, the LAS is framing the challenge of improving support for content-informed triage from two different but related perspectives: information extraction and information summarization. Slide, please. If we look at information extraction, the interest for triage has also developed over the past few years and is now centered around techniques in image and audio detection, including using synthetic data techniques to contribute to model training and development. The pivot in content triage began a few years ago when the lab was introduced to a mission challenge from a partner that was intaking large volumes of images to be analyzed for information on potential video security capabilities. What resulted was the iReckon prototype, a system platform used for automated detection of objects of interest. But the lab also found that there was interest in compounding iReckon image detection with other modalities, including video and audio, or even combinations of all three. Developing models that are performant in detection, be it image, video, or sound, is a challenge in and of itself, but conversations with colleagues also kept circling around a need to easily and quickly adapt these models to other objects of interest without having to retrain a model from scratch. From this, the lab has become interested in techniques to reuse models and fine-tune them on other objects. In a similar vein to fine-tuning existing models, the lab is also investigating the ability for the model to inform when model performance has degraded due to misrepresentative data. A broader way of looking at model degradation is to explore the larger theme of model metrics, and ideas in this space would be great projects for the lab to collaborate on. And of course, we cannot get away from the need to have labeled data for model development. And that's why there's a complementary interest in synthetic data techniques as part of the iReckon research priorities. Cue the storm. In the past 2 years, the lab has run a few successful research projects to create training data sets with synthetic data techniques. These techniques can significantly reduce labeled data needed to train a model through altering and modifying existing data. These techniques can cause issues with overfitting, though, so part of the interest additionally looks to explore techniques to mitigate model overfitting as an additional research challenge. Slide, please. Information summarization is the other perspective that I mentioned earlier. Our analysts have lots and lots of data, all kinds of data. For this challenge, we will work to minimize the time it takes for an analyst to come up to speed with what is already known about a data point, to better help them prioritize their time, avoid duplication, and focus on gaps. The delivery of key insights from large volumes of information through digestible visualizations or text summarizations should also leverage the ability of machine-oriented agents to spot patterns on data at scale, helping steer analyst attention as appropriate. Such features should be focused on flexibility that uncovers not only relevant data, but helps illuminate gaps in what is known and unknown. Other efforts in this space might take advantage of existing knowledge bases, including evidence that may be implied, inferred, or result from a shared understanding. And relevance is also, well, relevant here, and to explore ways to promote data that is newly pertinent. Don't forget that all of these summarization challenges are more or less applicable in all sorts of data modalities, from network logs to metadata, to natural language text, to audio, to image, to video. Likely each of these will have different approaches, but they're all of interest to the lab. One last thing on the summarization challenge, we're hoping to set up a design studio for the fall that takes on the summarization and prioritization of insights challenge with a class of design students. The whole project is motivated by an existing operational tool, which is a big deal here because seeing the LAS research translate into the mission space is the gold star of what we strive for each year here at the LAS. Stay tuned to our social media feeds at the end of the fall semester for results on what our design students envision. LAS research themes are always evolving. Similarly, the challenges for content triage in 2024 look a little different from the research challenges in the past, taking on critical problems in event detection, model and data adaptability, and summarization. I hope you found one or more of these challenges engaging and relevant to your own research interests. We're ready, excited, and looking forward to reading all the great ideas you may submit in the content triage research space. Now we'll have a quick check-in with Alyson to see if there are any questions at this point. Please remember you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom to submit your questions at any time during the Collaboration Day webinar.
Great, thank you, Laurie. I would also like to mention that there are a few of the participants who have raised your hand. We aren't able to address questions or comments through the raise hand feature, so I would appreciate it if you would instead direct those questions into the Q&A feature of the webinar. So we do have two questions that I would like for us to address live. And so Matt, I think I'll let you kick off the response to the first one. So one of the things that we mentioned when we were setting up the kinds of responses that we were interested in was that we're interested in things that can be translated. So I was wondering if you could potentially share a few examples of projects that have been translated into use.
Yeah, I can do my best to answer that with the understanding that some of the translations we aren't quite able to talk about in this setting, but I'll just highlight a couple of projects because I think this area of translation and transition can be something that different people have different expectations. So one project I'll highlight is work that we did actually a couple of years ago now around the problem of identifying radicalization and building out models for radicalization and susceptibility to those in a basically in a terrorism setting. And so that was research that originally we started with a professor in psychology who was looking at that problem from the perspective of recidivism in prison populations. And a lot of the questions that she was asking when we started talking kind of made sense to transition to a different type of application. Their research eventually led to discussion with folks in a variety of the communities in the federal government. It led to some production of some handbooks around, particular features and signifiers of potential for radicalization and things like that. So it started out as a shared interest, even though it was a shared interest with, a slightly different application. It evolved into, something that may be more applicable and translatable. And then as that got exposed to the broader community, those applications kind of became more bespoke to the particular customer set that was interested in the research. So that's one. We also have had research around basically investments by foreign states to influence other countries, right? So the particular example was around the Belt and Road Initiative, and really looking at some of the research of how do those, how is that detectable? How is how do you measure that influence? How is that something that you can basically support with data? What came out of that was we actually had a student work on a dashboard that allowed you to see visually kind of where the investments were being made across the globe. And that was connected with a few of our stakeholders, and that kind of got discussed about how that might look like in an operational setting. Now, that wasn't something that that code got picked up and deployed operationally, right? The discussions were with the people who have responsibility for those operational tools. And so some of those features were integrated into those tools. Some of the ideas were implemented by folks outside of LAS to actually do that transition. But the concept was originated here, and then that kind of, again, became somewhat bespoke based on who the partners were that we were working with to actually do that transition. So that's generally how these types of things happen, where there's some sort of application, and we'll talk more in the next session about, this year's applications of interest that motivates research in the technical areas you just described. And then as that research matures, it gets connected with stakeholders and potential customers that can actually take that research and either build an operational tool or integrate it into their operational workflows through a more concentrated effort that sometimes happens even outside of LAS. So that's some examples, if that's something that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Matt. We did have one other question that I thought I would ask you to address here. So could you speak briefly to whether there are any restrictions on who can participate with LAS in terms of citizenship or other requirements? And can you speak a bit to the publication and publication requirements?
Yeah, so in terms of who can work on LAS projects, so the default assumption is that LAS work is going to be fundamental research. And so we don't have restrictions on who can work, but we do require that any foreign nationals are, we're informed of any foreign national involvement prior to the beginning of the project. So if there are foreign nationals who intend to work on the project, we need, there's a form that we need you to fill out to make us aware of that involvement. But because the research is fundamental research, it should not cause any issues. Now, there are some projects that are not fundamental research, but those are usually projects that are identified beforehand. In that case, there may be restrictions. Those are usually projects that end up classified anyway. And so all of the issues with classification and clearances come in, and it's not something that we would be able to have foreign nationals work on anyway. So that's usually kind of the two buckets. The much bigger bucket is that most of the work that LAS does is fundamental research, but we are required to inform when there are foreign national participants. And the smaller bucket is if there is something that is restricted, it's usually classified anyway, and therefore only cleared people can work on it anyways. So that's restrictions on who can work on it. Now, in terms of publications, we do require that anything involving LAS work that is intended for public release, including research publications, presentations at conferences, any sort of publication of LAS work goes through the LAS pre-pub review process. That is a process set up to identify whether or not there's any sort of classification issues with the publication. It is not intended to be a review for content or restricted on there. It's, again, just a restriction for classified information or proprietary information that may be in that publication. So that's the main quote unquote restriction, is that it needs to go through the pre-pub review process before publishing. Okay.
Great, thank you, Matt. That was the last of the questions that we had right now.
Okay. So the next thing we wanted to talk about, so we've talked about kind of the technical areas that LAS is interested in. When you're thinking about white papers and you're thinking about the work, you should be thinking about how that work aligns with those technical areas, right? Those are the questions, those are the research areas that we want to work in. But when we're considering what sort of work does LAS do and what do we not do, we think a little bit about sort of, okay, what are the application areas that might motivate those questions in the technical areas? And thinking about those sort of applications and sort of operational challenges both motivates the work at LAS, but it also gives us a way to validate the outcomes of the work, right? So if there's research on large language models and developing a capability, we'd like to validate that capability based on, an application that's similar to something operational that can really give us a sense of, okay, this would provide a new capability that we haven't had in the past. So the operational challenges and the mission challenges, some of which the LAS is interested in, are going to be classified. We tend to find unclassified proxy applications for anything like that. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about a number of unclassified application areas that LAS is interested in, right, for the purposes of motivating the research in the technical areas and potentially down the line validating that the research can have these sort of operational applications down the line. So that's the goal for this section. And if you want to go to the next slide, we'll talk about the first application area. Okay, so one of the application areas that LAS has been interested in for a while is around speech and voice data, right? Really about how do you help an analyst identify voice content relevant to their information needs. So when we're talking about voice data or speech data in this context, we're talking about a particular type of data, right? This is usually audio that is ambient, right? So this is not someone talking into a microphone for a podcast. This may be, people who are talking and the microphone is kind of catching it in a room. There may be multiple speakers. So there's a lot of noise, both in the audio and also in the content, right? So people can be talking about a lot of different things. There may be unexplained references where, the person talking doesn't have any interest in explaining what it is they're talking about. And then there's enough noise and things that if we try to transcribe this audio, there's very likely going to be a lot of transcription errors. And so there's very noisy both audio and any sort of transcription. So given all of those constraints, right, the challenge that we're really looking at is how do we leverage this voice content and how do we help analysts identify the voice content that's relevant to a particular question or information need that they have. And we're interested in that question both from the perspective of an individual analyst, where they're trying to find voice content that they're that's relevant to their work, but also in a team perspective, right? So let's say, you know, different members of the team have different expertise. They may be able to understand different parts of the content. They may have, you know, different snippets or different understandings of the speakers, of the content. How do we help them work together? How do we help them actually work together to address whatever information need that that they may be trying to address? So next slide. So oftentimes when we have kind of a very like somewhat constrained part of a common problem like audio analysis, we try to find a proxy data set that can help us really narrow down like, oh, okay, that's the type of thing that you're talking about. And in this context, LAS has had for a number of years been leveraging a data set based on recordings from the Nixon White House. These were recordings that were made in the Oval Office between 1971 and 1973. So again, this is, you know, being made, it's audio that's kind of ambient audio. There's lots of different speakers. There's lots of different topics. There's a lot of noise in the actual data. So we've worked with a variety of partners to get access to this data. We've then done a number of things to enrich it. So we've done all of the animated or automated transcriptions. We've thought about, okay, given this data, what would be a useful proxy for a question that an analyst might be trying to answer? So there's a number of proxy intelligence needs or questions that we can use to kind of explore different capabilities. We have some proxy tools that users in unclassified studies can use that are analogous to something an analyst might use. And then we've actually got results from previous user studies about how people try to go about solving or addressing these intelligence needs. So all of that data and enrichment is available to folks who are interested in doing work based on this application. Next slide. So the second application to talk about is one we may have mentioned a few times here, is around the production of tailored summaries of relevant information, right? So if I'm an intelligence analyst, there's a lot of reporting out there that may be relevant to whatever I'm working on, but that reporting is typically fact of reporting, right? It's not produced with me and my specific intelligence need in mind. So it may be relevant, but it may be relevant to different analysts for different reasons. And it may be relevant at different times, right? A week ago, I wasn't interested in this report, but some things happened in the world and now I'm interested in it, right? And so when a system can identify that, yes, this is something that's relevant, if I'm putting this in front of a user, I probably also need to explain that context. I also need to explain why am I putting this in front of you so that the user can see that. So the challenge here is really, how do you summarize or produce these sort of text-based summaries of the available and relevant information based on what you know of the individual analyst's needs. And the best example we have for what we're talking about here is the President's Daily Brief, right? So the President's Daily Brief is a document that has been produced for 50 years now for the president each day that summarizes the relevant intelligence for them. This is a document that's now put out by the ODNI, used to be generated by the CIA. It's very highly classified. It takes in intelligence from across the intelligence community, but the summaries really evolve to meet the needs and preferences of each president, right? It's gone from a couple-page document back in the Eisenhower administration to a digital version of that based on the most recent presidencies. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, but we're talking about producing something like that for every intelligence analyst in the community, right? So there's a scaling issue that we really need to figure out how to address via the different technical areas that we've talked about previously. Next slide. So this is also the challenge problem that is the grand challenge for the Summer Conference on Applied Data Science, or SCADS. So SCADS is a conference that LAS has hosted the past 2 years. It's focused on bringing in researchers and analysts to address exactly this grand challenge of producing these tailored daily reports for intelligence analysts. It's held for 8 weeks in the summer. We intend to hold it in 2024 as well. And we look to engage the academic and industry community as participants in this conference. And so if this is a challenge that motivates or is of interest to you, we do allow our funded collaborators to propose that they actually participate in SCADS as part of their work during the full year, right? So researching the work and then coming to SCADS for a more concentrated effort with a broader set of collaborators and then continuing the work in the fall. So we just wanted to mention that that's a possibility as well. Next slide. Okay. The third application I'll talk about is around the detection and discovery of objects and activities in full motion video, right? So full motion video is a type of video data that has a lot of rich information about, what may be going on in the video or the, the behavior of the different objects in the video. But it's also pretty non-discriminatory, right? So there's a lot of uninformative content. There's a lot of boring full motion video that makes finding that rich information very tedious. And so there's a lot of support that has already been developed in this area. And the particular things that LAS is interested in is around, how do we tailor it so that people can find the objects that they are interested in, right? So how do I get my interest to inform what's being detected and what's being shown to me? Also looking at ways of addressing some of the issues with the data, right? So the data is being recorded, or the video is being recorded. Sometimes the platform that video is being recorded on is moving, which can affect a lot of the detection and discovery algorithms that are out there. So really the challenge here around full motion video is we'd like to improve the object and activity detection methods in full motion video in a way that actually increases the efficiency of the use of video in different analyst workflows. And so if we go to the next slide, this is something that we have a number of different projects in. It really is, as Lori mentioned, motivation for a lot of our work in content triage. But a particular interest that we wanted to highlight here because it has the potential of maybe an early start to this work would be around the questions of model and data drift in full motion video. So full motion video, it's being recorded in a lot of different conditions. So the video can look different depending on whether it's cloudy or sunny or night or day. And then the actual things that are of interest may change as well. And those sort of drift problems can affect the performance of the algorithms that are trying to detect them. And so we're really interested in work that may be looking at how do you monitor the data to detect this type of drift, any sort of anomaly detections that say, hey, this might be a different type of activity that you might be interested in, and any sort of user-facing tools that allow the analyst to kind of navigate that uncertainty and actually figure out, are my algorithms performing at the rate that I need them to perform, right? So again, this is a particular thing that may have the potential for starting work in fall 2023. All the other work that we're talking about here, all the other white papers would start in January of 2024. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next technical area I'll talk about is around the analysis of technical documentation. So there's a wide set of technical documentation out there, everything from patent applications, technical manuals, research papers, and that type of documentation is not the same as a text-based web article or blog post or things like that, but it can provide a lot of information about current or potential technical capabilities. And so a big part of technical intelligence is trying to characterize and forecast the technical landscape based on what information is out there. So a lot of that gets done through very intense reading of these types of technical documentation. But as the amount of technical documentation grows, there's a desire for tools and assistance that can actually help them make sense of a broader set of technical documentation. So this is something that could drive research in human-machine teaming strategies, in some of the operationalizing AI and machine learning around different types of extracting information, and then also the content triage around how do you actually leverage a larger set of technical documentation. So this can motivate a lot of different work that LAS would be interested in. Next slide. The next application that I'll talk about is around the generation of constrained summaries. So we already kind of talked about the generation of tailored summaries with regards to the SCADS Grand Challenge and some of the work that Jascha mentioned around large language models. This particular application kind of differentiates from that in that sometimes the summaries that we're trying to generate need to omit or obscure sensitive information, right? So if we're trying to generate a summary that at a lower classification level, that might be something that would be beneficial, but actually doing that and actually requiring a human to generate all those summaries can be a time-consuming task. And so what we're looking for here are techniques that might help either generate initial drafts or doing that in some sort of automated or semi-automated fashion, but also ways that you might be able to control or direct those methods, right? So how do you actually specify what information you want to omit when you're asking it to generate a summary? Okay, next slide. Okay, we're also interested in research around the triaging of manipulated media, or deepfakes is another term that's been used for manipulated media. So we've all heard about the increasing capabilities of generating more plausible manipulations or faked images and video and content. And that not only creates uncertainty around that content, but also pretty much any content that's out there, right? Even if that particular image or video has not been manipulated, it could generate a question of whether or not it has. So there's a lot of research out there already around ways that can be done. And LAS is interested in leveraging that research, if not necessarily doing that research. the thing that LAS is really interested in is how do you make that information make those techniques usable by someone who doesn't know the latest state of the art as to what the features of a synthetically generated image or manipulated image might be, right? So really kind of some of the human machine teaming questions and explainability questions around the tools that you might be able to use to identify if this is something that potentially has been manipulated or this is something that has not. Next slide. Another large area that we're interested in is around signals analysis. And so there's a particular type of problem within the analysis of RF or radio frequency communication signals, which is just how do I actually understand what signals are out there in an environment and how do I characterize them of this signal is actually this type of signal. So historically, that's been something that's done via a lot of manual feature engineering based on specific signals of this signal has these, these markers or these features. If you see something that looks like this, it probably is this type of signal. That type of approach is becoming more and more difficult to adapt as the variety of noise and impairments in complex environments grows. And so there's a lot of interest in potentially using AI and machine learning techniques to kind of help reduce this need for a priori feature engineering, right? Just like machine learning and deep learning was beneficial in reducing the need for hand-tailored feature sets in doing, image or object detections in images or natural language processing. Is there the potential for doing or for leveraging those techniques to do a similar thing in the signal processing domain? So that's kind of a lot of the motivation. There's a number of data sets out there that are both physically captured and synthetically generated. And those data sets enable the potential training and validation of these machine learning models, but there's not necessarily enough of them to really support all the variety of environments that could exist. So if you go to the next slide, there's a number of challenges in this area that could motivate work of interest to LAS. So one is around, just doing the fingerprinting and categorizing of all the RF signals in a noisy environment, leveraging those methods to optimize and automatically adapt the communication signal based on the presence of interferers. So, how do we help the actual transmission or reception of a signal using some of these AI and machine learning methods that can adapt on the fly? And then finally, kind of to the data set problem of, are there other ways of actually generating this, or are there more efficient ways of generating these types of data sets so that methods could be tested and validated in a variety of environments? Next slide. Okay, and then the final application area we'll talk about today is really around measuring the value of an analytic resource, right? So whether it's a data set, whether it's an analytic or a particular tool, a lot of the components to analysis are managed by the organization, and all organizations have finite resources. And so if an organization is trying to make determinations of which data sets they maintain, which analytics they support, which tools they support, they like to make those decisions informed by data on what of those are most valuable to the missions and applications of their community. And so an interesting and a very relevant source of information would be around, okay, well, what data is actually being interacted with? What data is actually being used? That can come from user interactions, but if that data set is not directly used, right, if that data set only feeds into an analytic, which produces an output, which eventually gets used by a user, that data might not have the greatest, user interaction score. And so the challenge here is really about thinking how to actually capture or store or utilize the interaction data so that the people who are making the decisions about what resources to support or what resources to maintain have an informed or data informed environment in which to make that decision. So that's kind of, a lot of the research around kind of just content triage or human machine teaming, but also thinking about it from a perspective of just operationally, you can generate a lot of information about interactions. And so how do you manage the size of that so that your metric data doesn't actually grow beyond the size of your actual data set? So doing that in an efficient manner is a key component of this. Okay, and then next slide. So those are basically a description of the unclassified application areas that we mentioned in the call. As I mentioned, if they can motivate or if they can validate some of the research that's being done in the technical areas, that's what we're trying to achieve. And so if there's any questions that people had that we can answer now, I'd be happy to. But Alyson, is there anything that we need to talk about now?
Actually, what we need to talk about now, and the questions are all about how to do this, about office hours, about how to submit the white papers, about whether people can submit more than one. So I'm going to say, let's move on to the final section of the webinar so you can answer some of those for them.
Okay. So next slide. Great. So let's talk about logistics, right? Let's talk about what the next steps are and what you need to be aware of as you think about submitting a white paper. So next slide. So what's the timeline look like? So we break down kind of the prep phase of projects into a process where LAS is trying to solicit white papers. And we kind of have three parts of that. We release the call for white papers, right? That's a physical document you can go read on the website. That was done in May. Today, we're doing Collaborators Day. That's where we try and talk a little bit more and give a little more context than we could say in the call for white papers. But both of us are kind of LAS talking to our potential collaborators. What comes next is a 3-week period where we hold what we call office hours, where we can actually get into a dialogue with some of our potential formers about where the mutual interest between what LAS is interested in and what our potential collaborators are interested in lie. And so that's going to happen over the 3 weeks from June 26th through July 14th. And then July 21st is when we're going to have the deadline for actually submitting a white paper. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the office hour sessions. So office hours, as I mentioned, is a time for you to actually talk to some of the LAS staff who are interested in similar topics. If you'd like to participate, the thing you need to do is request an office hour time via the Google form linked here. The Google form is also linked on the LAS website through the office hour event on the LAS website. We request that you limit your request to one office hour topic just because of a limited availability for time slots. But we do ask that you list all of your available times so that we can schedule you in a way that allows us to do the most time slots. Once you fill out the form, LAS will follow up and actually say, okay, yes, this is the actual 15 or 10-minute time slot that you have, and send you a calendar invite. So you won't get a calendar invite right away. It'll actually come a day or two later once we have a chance to do the scheduling. Next slide. There's 3 different types of office hours, so make sure that you're signing up for the right ones. So the first one is just around logistics. If you have a question that we don't answer today around how to work with LAS, or if you'd like maybe a little bit more guidance of, here's my interest, but I'm not sure what area that aligns with, we can talk to you in a logistics office hour session. There are technical office hour sessions. That's where you can talk to some of the LAS staff who are interested in the technical areas that Jascha, Christine, and Lori talked about, and really figure out, okay, here's where the interests overlap between what I'm interested in and what LAS is interested in. And then the final one is around applications. So any of the different applications that I just talked about, we can kind of talk about how that might motivate or validate some of the work that you might be interested in doing. Next slide. So for the logistics office hour sessions, those would be with Alyson as the LAS PI, myself as the director of programs, and then Tiffany Bryant, our director of operations. As I mentioned, these are focused on logistics about how to work with LAS, and both of the available sessions would be next week. We have one session on Monday, June 26th, and we have one session on Friday, June 30th. That's intended so that if we do direct you to talk with a different technical or application area, you have time to schedule that session as well. Next slide. So the technical office hour sessions, as I mentioned, focusing on the technical areas, these will be 90-minute sessions. With each of those, we'll have 6 available time slots of 15 minutes each for you to talk. And if you go to the next slide, that lists kind of the different times and which technical area we'll be able to talk about in each of those times. So all this information will be on the website. You can review it there if you don't get it here, but just generally, we're going to try and do the content triage office hours next week, followed by the operationalizing and AI and machine learning office hours the next week, and then the week of the 10th through the 14th doing the human machine teaming office hours. Next slide. Lastly, the application office hour sessions. We've got the 8 applications that I just talked about. We've got staff who can, and stakeholders who can talk more in depth about any of those. So we tried to schedule enough sessions that we can cover as much or as little interest in any of those applications. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that across those 5 times, not every application is going to be available to be talked to. So when you're scheduling the office hour sessions for applications, or when you're requesting those, please make sure you're requesting a time slot where we have people available to talk about the application that you're interested in. Next slide. Okay. So that's office hours. Again, your next step, if you want to schedule an office hour, is to go and fill out the Google form. And hopefully we can talk to you and figure out where some mutual interest lies there. Once we've done all of that, right, once we've had office hours, we've had Collaborators Day, we've had call for white papers, we are asking you to submit a white paper. And so if you want to work with LAS, right, that's if you are a potentially new performer or an existing performer, you must submit a white paper for next year's work. You can submit more than one white paper if you have multiple ideas about what to work on. And in fact, we encourage that. So if there are 2 different things that you might want to work on, please submit 2 white papers. Don't try and cram 2 ideas into one white paper. It's just harder to review that way. You can submit white papers with co-PIs. So if there's more than one partner that wants to work on a white paper, you can submit it as a co-proposal. Next slide. Okay, so what goes into a white paper? We describe this in detail in the call for white papers. If you want more information, please go read section 6.1 of the call for white papers. But real quickly, your white paper must include a title. It must include a listing of all of the PIs or organizations that you would like funded, along with contact information. And then the actual meat of the white paper is going to be in the next 5 things. So we are requesting an abstract, right? Just kind of an overview of what you're proposing. We would like you to explicitly say what problem it is that you're trying to address with the work you're proposing. We're asking for a description of any potential applications you see for this work, right? So thinking about, all the applications that we talked about, thinking about any application that you're aware of that we didn't talk about, help us see how you think this work might be applicable to some of those applications of interest, right? That's what we're talking about with the description of potential applications. Those 3 things should all be pretty short, right? About a paragraph, max of about 200 words. We're going to take those and actually circulate them amongst our stakeholders. So please don't include any proprietary or classified information in any of those, and write them in a way that you would be comfortable with us sharing fairly broadly in our stakeholder community. The meat of the white paper is going to be your technical description. All right, so that's where you describe what it is you're actually proposing to work on. That is not something we are going to share broadly. That is something we are only sharing with the reviewers of the white paper itself, right? So that's where you can go a little bit more into detail into what it is that you're actually proposing. And then the last part of the white paper is the capability description. That's max 1 page. Ideally, that's just a paragraph or 2 about basically your experience and why you are the right person to do this work. So the capability description is max 1 page. The technical description is a maximum of 2 pages. So we're trying not to make this an overly we're trying not to make this too much work for you, but we do need enough detail that we can actually evaluate what it is you're proposing. Next slide. So we have created a template. If you want a template, you don't have to use the template as long as you're including those pieces of information we just talked about. But if you'd like to use the template, it's on the submission website for you to download and fill in. We do ask that no white papers include any sort of classified, proprietary, or sensitive information. We cannot emphasize that enough. We are not intending these things to be classified or sensitive in any way. We also don't ask that in the white paper you submit any information about a budget. We are going to ask you for a rough order of magnitude budget request, but that'll be entered directly into the submission tool. That's not something we're going to ask you to submit in the white paper itself. Next slide. Okay, so when you're thinking about the rough order of magnitude budget request, we have some guidelines that you should think through in the type of award that we typically give. So for our academic partners, our standard award is equivalent to about 1 month of summer salary. It should be enough to fund a 12-month graduate student. That includes both their stipend or salary plus any tuition benefit for them. And then in addition to that, we allow up to $3,600 of other direct costs. That includes any travel that you foresee in terms of conferences or anything like that. So whatever those numbers add up to, that should be the number that you should enter in your ROM budget request. The award can be used to fund postdocs or undergrads as well, but that shouldn't affect the amount of that you're proposing. So if your postdoc is more expensive than a grad student, we're probably only going to be able to fund less of their time. You can submit additional scope options if you would like to fund more than one grad student, but please submit a base option with an option to fund one grad student and then additional scope options based on additional work for the additional grad students. Next slide. Okay, for the industry partners, the standard award is $250,000 or less, and that should include all direct and indirect costs for you. So in that case, you can also submit additional scope options at the level of an additional $100K each, but again, make sure you submit the base at $250K or less. If any of these levels don't seem appropriate, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we can talk about whether or not there's other options that might make sense. Next slide. So once you have all of that information, the way that you submit a white paper is through the online portal at whitepapers.ncsu-las.net. That link is also in the call for white papers and on the website. So once you get to that submission tool, you'll upload your white paper. You'll also enter a number of pieces of information, including the abstract, problem statement, and description of potential applications that we talked about. That'll also be the place that you enter your budget request. Next slide. Okay, and then real quickly, just to give you a sense, right? So we're going to take the white papers, we're going to go through a review process that'll probably take about 2 months. And so white papers are due July 21st. We're hoping to get responses back, or at least initial responses back to people by September 22nd. And then final responses back by early November. The way that we are going to evaluate that during the evaluation process is really along these 3 dimensions. So we're looking for white papers that have the potential to have impact, right? If you're successful, is this something that would have a positive impact on intelligence analysts? We're looking for work that is innovative, right? So please don't propose work on things that have already been built or research that has already been done. We're looking for new ideas. We're looking for new approaches. We're looking for new ways of integrating existing approaches, right? So some sort of novelty and innovation. And then the third way is really around engagement, right? Is this something that would actually align with LAS's interest, either in technical interest or both in technical interest and in application areas? And that's, I think, the last slide we have. So next slide. Yeah. So any outstanding questions we can answer now. Again, please be sure to read the call for white papers. And if you would like to have an office hour, go ahead and register for that through the ncsu-las.org website.
And for the office hours, as we've mentioned, we do encourage you to try to just sign up for one of the office hours. We know that for many of these areas, there's lots of overlap between the area of application and the research areas. So do try to pick the one that aligns the best with the questions that you would like to ask. If you find that the office hours that best align with what you want have filled up, please send an email to lasoutreach@ncsu, and we'll be happy to work with you to figure out how to move that forward. And with that, we would like to thank everyone for spending this 90 minutes with us today. The video and the slides will be posted to our website within the next few days. And again, if you have any questions, we encourage you to send us an email at lasoutreach@ncsu.edu. Check the website, and we are looking forward to seeing your submissions. So thank you very much.